Hello, my name is David Elliott. I'm the professor of horn at the University of Kentucky. I'd like to talk with you a bit about etude number 15 from the Koprosh Studies for Horn. This one is the first one on the All-State Audition and presents a very interesting rhythmic situation because it's notated in a style that's not very familiar to us in our current time. And the thing of it is that the measure has 6 beats in it, and instead of a quarter note getting a beat, an eighth note gets a beat. The reason that the 84 with an eighth note equals adagio means very slow, and 84 is not so slow. But if you put 2 beats at 84 together, you would get a beat that is 42 beats long, and that would be a very slow beat. So while this is notated in 3/4, it's easier to count it more accurately in 6, and so hence the reason for our discussion in 6. So you must understand that an eighth note does get a beat, and then think what an eighth note divided in half would be, and it would be, of course, 2/16 notes. If you were to divide 2/16 notes in half, you would get a pair of 32nds, and those are the things that show up in the piece. You see, there are many instances of eighth notes by themselves. Dotted eighth note, which would be a beat and a half. Here are groups of simply 2 eighth notes or 4 eighth notes, which would be, those two would be with 1 beat, and those two would be with 1 beat. And throughout, there are several instances of pairs of 32nd notes. In this etude, every time you have the 32nd notes, they appear on the and of either beat 2, 4, or 6. So we'll get more into that in just a minute. A couple general things about this. First off, I don't think that this repeat should be taken. I'd be very surprised if that was the intent. And I understand that the excerpt shows ending there after that note. I think that no one would question the fact that really this phrase should end there, and that note just can be saved for some other time if you're going to play the whole piece. Another general thing to talk about in here is dynamics before we go back to the rhythm. This particular edition that I have may be slightly than the one you see, but in general there are 3 dynamics presented here. There's a forte, there's mezzo forte, and mezzo piano in this particular case. Let's call this basically the same thing. And then there's a piano. So to make a really good effect of dynamic contrast, I would simply suggest that you play the forte about as loud as you can play with a good sound. Play the mezzo fortes or mezzo pianos just normal playing, and then make the piano, as soft as you can play comfortably. You don't have to be super soft to get a contrast, but if you make your loud enough and the mezzo forte loud enough, then you can still have a comfortable piano rather than having to be really uptight about the piano. Let's talk about a couple rhythmic situations here. And first off, let's look at the very first 2 measures, not excluding the last note. And I've written out a thing here which shows not the pitches but simply the rhythms. So let's take a look at this with a little bit of care. And you notice that there are going to be 6 beats in the measure, and it would start on the last one of that, so it would start on 6. Beat 1 here is a beat and a half, so it would incorporate the total first beat and the half of the second beat, the first half. The second half of the second beat is 2 32nd notes. And you notice this beat, these 2 beats right here, and these 2 beats here are very close to the same. The only difference is that in this particular grouping, the second note is divided in 2. So that note and that note should start exactly in the same place. That is on the and of 2. I've enlisted the aid of Dr. Beat's nurse, who will count all 6 beats and will count the ands. So let's see if we can follow along here and hear how the and really sets up where that note starts and where that note starts. So the first 5 beats here are dead.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5
here we are.
and 6
6
and
1
and 2
and
3
3
and
4
4 and 5 and
6
and
1
and 2
and 3.
and 4.
So it's really important that we get that. Let's hear what that sounds like.
And 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2
I'm
and
going to
3
start on beat
and
6.
4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and.
So I hope that you can see that I very carefully placed the start of the 32nds and the start of the 16th note right smack on the ands. And if you proceed that way through the whole piece, you'll give a very, very good impression that you understand the rhythm. Let's look at another feature in here, and this is the turn. Now a turn is an ornament, and the word ornament itself is intended for something that would make something look pretty. You know, earrings or lipstick or something, or nice wristbands, or even tattoos. The idea is not to be an athletic event, but be something graceful. So keep that in mind when you do this, even though the turn itself turns out rather quickly. The turn, you notice, incorporates 2 beats, 1 and 2. And the notes that are played, and it does give you the example of how to execute it. The turn itself is completed before the B shows up. And so the shape of the symbol is the shape of the notes. You notice that you start out on the note itself, you turn around the note with an A, a G, and an F sharp, and then you come back to the note where you started, and that would complete the turn. The best way to count that, I think, is you want on the end of the first beat to have 3 notes, and then on beat 2 you have 2 notes. So you could count very easily 1 triplet 2 and. Now I know triplet is really only a 2-syllable word, triplet, but we'll make it 3 syllables to make this work. So 1 triplet 2 and then the 3 would come on that note. So this measure would be 1 triplet 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 6 1 2 and 3. So let's let the Dr. Beat do that again, and it will start right out on beat 1. So let's get right at it here. Right. And we're going to think 1 triplet 2 and
1
triplet 2 and 3
and 4
and
and
let's do again
5 and
6
and
1 triplet 2 and
3 and
so here's what it sounds like.
5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and.
So it's really that simple, and you have to do that 3 times in this piece. Let me show you another trap to worry about on this one. Down here we have 2 triplets in a row, and do play the accidentals that are shown. I won't explain why the B flat shows up so early, but let's do it that way anyway. So a lot of my students will play it like this. Dum ba da 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 dum ba da 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 dum, which is wrong, because the 8th notes should each get a beat. So the correct execution of it would be lum ba da 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 dum dum. So don't be one of the many that audition that make that mistake, and that will put you in very good shape with the judge. Remember, overall, this is meant to be a song. This is really not an exercise, and make it as musical as you can, even though you have some of these complex rhythmic things. And I wish you well on this wonderful excerpt. Hello, I'm David Elliott, the professor of horn at the University of Kentucky. I'd like to talk with you a bit about the second excerpt in this year's All-State Audition Music, which is Etude number 9 from the Koprosh Studies for Horn. This one is pretty much a one-item sort of thing. It's very connected, fast notes with slurs and tonguing, and the instance of the half step, the whole step situation being under a slur. The tempo that's indicated, core note equal 100, I think is a little bit on the spry side, and my suggestion would be, if you can play it that fast smoothly, wonderful, but play it only as fast as you can play it rather accurately. And if it comes in a little slower than that and you get all the notes in pretty much good style, it would be better than very sloppiness trying to do it at 100. A quick perusal of the dynamics again would show that there really aren't that many dynamics. I think the Audition you have doesn't even have this mezzo forte. I think it's pretty much basically loud and soft. So my suggestion there would be that you make your fortes a little bit firmer than just natural playing, and then your pianos can be a little bit less, and you don't have to make the piano really very, very quiet to give a contrast between a piano and a forte. So having said that, you notice that this is pretty much a steady stream of 16th notes. And I have a suggestion of the way to practice streaming 16th notes or 8th notes, and that's to change. First of all, we'll get rid of all the slurs and play everything tongued, and play the notes in a long short pattern, and then repeat it doing short and long. And what that does, you practice quickly going between only every other note. So when you're doing the long and short, you're going quickly between those two notes, and then resting between there, going quickly between those two notes, and resting. So then when you turn it around, you practice, in essence, going between the notes that you've been resting on before. So the notes that you practice here would be very quickly between there, rest there, and then quickly between there. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how that might work, just working on this very first measure going into this note. So we're going to do it first all tongued, and then I'll do it with the slurs as marked. Another thing that's very important in this sort of an etude is to avoid having gaps between the beats. So to get rid of that concept, I'm going to change the articulation for another practice session, or another practice period, and that is where we'll slur from the second and third note and from the fourth to the first. Of course, this one you have to just sort of tongue by itself, so that then the slurring pattern would be this way. So I'm going to sit down and play along and show you how these different ways would work. So we're going to do this measure right here and end on that note. So first of all, we'll do it with long and short notes. This is all tongue without the slurs. And then do that several times, and then reverse it. So you do short long. And then go back and do the long shorts, but do it with the slur. And then the other way. And so on. And then let's do the slurring that I showed you, where we're going to slur second to third and fourth to one. And then having done that, then you put them all together, and it should come out a pretty neat situation. And if you do it measure by measure that way, and then incorporate a couple measures together, I think you'll find that this will help you be able to play this rather smoothly. Let's talk a little bit about some alternate fingerings that might help. In general, it would be best to play this with all the standard fingerings. But in case there are some problems that you might have, let me suggest just a couple. And the first would be the situation between the F and the G, which requires a lip slur. And some of us are not as facile as others. And very often when I have this situation, I'll use a fingering of F first valve on the B horn to open on the B horn. And I think that helps some. You could also do it the reverse, where you play open to open. But I would suggest that the open one is the better fingering, especially in terms of intonation. Another problem that can occur is this business of a cross fingering. And if you look at this beat right here, you have a D to a C sharp, which means you have to play 1 and 2 to 2 and 3 and back to 1 and 2. And that's a little bit awkward. Well, the truth of the matter is that the length 1 and 2 in the B horn is exactly the same length as 3. So you can get the same pitch by playing this D3 and then going to the C sharp 2 and 3, which means you don't have to cross finger at all. You just add the second valve to get the C sharp. So that might help those situations. There's also that happens down here, and you could possibly do it there. The other fingering that I would want to mention is this G to the A. Now, I know a lot of us play the high A's open for a better pitch than 1 and 2, but in this situation you might very well consider doing the A 1 and 2 so you can get a fingering that would work. So I wish you well in this piece, and remember, play it only as fast as you can play it well and comfortably, and if you can get it to 100, that would be well and good. But I think the judges would appreciate a real good performance, a clean performance, even if it's at a slower tempo. I know in the times I've judged, I've never had a metronome in front of me checking to be sure that it was exactly as requested. So I wish you well on the audition, and especially on this etude. Hello, I'm David Elliott, professor of horn at the University of Kentucky, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the sight reading portion of the All-State Audition. This is something that I think we probably don't prepare ourselves enough for, and I thought maybe it would be helpful to just give you a few ideas of some things to look at before you even start playing it. And, you know, I've called it in the sports term pre-game preparations. So the very first thing you'd want to look at is the key signature, and shortly I'll put a piece of music up here and actually show you what these are. But this tells you what key you're in. The meter obviously tells you the time signature, whether it's in 2/4, 3/4, 6/8, whatever. The clef is treble or bass usually. If you're a trombone player, it could be tenor. And then the tempo markings, there are two kinds of these situations where these are done. One is simply by the marking MM equals. Well, that stands for a metronome marking. It will be equals 60 or something. Anyway, whatever that number is shows that's that many beats per minute. So that would give you some idea. Incidentally, a very easy way for you to figure out a rough approximation of any of these things is to look at your watch if you have a digital watch, and each second will click, and that would be 60. So if your tempo is 120, you try and go about twice as fast as each click. Transposition, this shows up for horn players once in a while, although I don't think you'll get this at All-State. But this is if it's in a key other than F, which means you'd have to do some transpositions. Most commonly that could be E flat, but I don't think you'll find that in the All-State Audition. Let's go back to the tempo markings. This is usually a set of Italian terms, and I've made up a list here which will be a little hard for you to keep track of in this short thing. So at the bottom I've showed you a good site where you can go online and get it, and I'll leave this on here a while, and you can hit your pause button and copy that down, or you could just put in tempo markings and Google it. Anyway, these terms go from the very slowest up through the very fast, and it would be a good idea for you to try and memorize these, or at least get some idea. Andante is a very common one. That's just sort of a walking tempo, somewhere around 70 or 80 beats a minute, something like that. And Allegro, of course, is fast and various degrees of fastness. So again, take advantage of looking up the site, and I think you'll be able to find this set of terms. Looking ahead on this sheet, once you get ready to look at the stuff actually in the body of music, all this stuff appears ahead of it. I'll show you. You want to look for things like accidentals, notes that don't belong to the key signature, different articulation markings, you know, staccatos, accents, tenuto marks, that sort of thing. Dynamics. This is something that often gets overlooked in sight reading, and if you really want to score well on that, you'll make some attempt at those. And then I think it's good to look for areas where you have more notes, where the notes get darker, because there'll be fast areas, and that's something that you want to be able to be comfortable with when you get there, instead of just coming at it from the beginning without having aware of it being there. Another thing is to check meter changes in the middle of a piece, to see if the beat stays the same or the note value stays the same. One or the other will always be the case, and so you want to have some thought about that. if it doesn't say anything or give you an indication, you can almost always count on the note value would stay the same. For example, the eighth note would be the same, and in one beat, one measure, there might be quarter note getting the beat, so you'd have 2 eighth notes, and in the next measure you'd have maybe a dotted quarter with 3 eighth notes, but the length of the beat wouldn't be the same, it would be longer, but the eighth notes would stay the same. And then in the middle of it all, you might look for clef changes so that you don't get halfway through the piece and see a bass clef show up. That will happen quite often in horn sight reading. Most important in sight reading is the following. The rhythm is by far the most important thing you can get right. If you're playing in an ensemble and you miss notes or accidentals, that's bad enough. But if you miss the rhythm, then the ensemble is totally out of kilter. So whatever you do, be sure you try and keep the rhythm correct. And whatever you do, don't stop in a sight reading experience. You know, if everything is going south, still try and keep the rhythm going, and keep playing as much as time as best you can. Let's look at a piece of music that might be a little more difficult than you get for sight reading, but it will again give us some idea of the things to look for. So the first thing we said, you look for the key signature. So you look over here and you see it's the unfortunate situation of having 5 sharps, which you hope you won't get. But if you do, then you simply play in B major, which is, of course, the scale you've all learned quite well, I hope. The next thing is the meter signature. And here you see it's common time, which means that there will be, in general, 4 beats to the measure. Then you look at the clef, and you see it's treble clef, which is what we play in most of the time. And the tempo marking in this case, moderato. So just sort of a, you know, not fast, not slow, just sort of, you know, just play. And then you see there's no transposition mark, so you can assume it's horn and F, and you play just what you normally would play. Now, the first thing that I would then look for into the body of the piece would be to see if there are any accidentals that take you out of the key that you're in. And in this one, there's one that shows up twice. This very interesting little thing here, and this is a double sharp. So what that would mean is instead of playing F sharp, you play a half step higher, which is a double F double sharp. In terms of reality, it's like playing a G natural. So if you see that ahead, you know, you should be able to quickly put that in the back of your mind so that when you get down in the piece to there, you won't say, what in the world is that? The next thing to look for is articulations, and this piece has a lot of them. It's got tenuto marks here, so you'd see that. Basically, it's tenuto all the way. And unfortunately, in this one, I don't see any accidentals. I should have picked better. But nonetheless, you've looked for that. Then dynamics, and there's certainly a lot of them here. So you want to get a basic idea before you even decide what the dynamics are, how many different ones there are here. And you see the soft is this pianist one. That doesn't happen to the very end, so you just place as soft as you can there. But then besides that, we have 1, 2, 3 different dynamics. So what I would suggest you do in a case like this, you make loud really pretty bold. You make mezzo piano, you know, sort of just the average sort of playing, and then you can make piano a little bit softer. And so you can give the relationships without having to think, well, how soft does piano have to be? Well, it's just softer than the other 2 that are above it, and forte would be the loudest you would play. Let's look for faster areas of notes. Well, obviously it's right over here. So you'd look at that and be sure you can figure out what goes on there. Fortunately, it's just basically down the B major scale, so you just go after that in that way. Then we look for meter changes, and this has got several of them in it. First off, we start out in 4/4 time, and then we go over to 2/4 and 3/4. Well, those are all pretty simple. You just keep the beat going, and one measure has 4, 2, 3. Then we get down to this second line when we have 2 measures that are in 3/8 time. And here's where the question comes up in your mind, I hope. Is the beat the same, or does the note value stay the same? Well, here it's been very clearly indicated that the 8th note equals the same. So the beat over here is going to be longer than it is here. So if you can think about it beforehand and over here start just counting 8th notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that would be a way to get through that. So if you take a good look at that, that would help you too. And this one does have one clef change, so you'd want to know that and figure out, in this case, what note that is. Well, if you can read bass clef, you know that that's an octave lower than that note, so that shouldn't give you too much trouble. And then back to treble clef. Remember, number one, the most important thing is, once you start, try and keep a steady tempo and try and get all the rhythms right, even if you miss a whole bunch of notes. Try and keep the rhythm the same. And whatever you do, don't stop and go back. Just start and go to the end. So I hope that helps some. And like anything else, you need to practice some sight reading. So ask your private teacher or your band director if you can borrow a few books of etudes or something, and sit down and do some practicing on this. So good luck with your sight reading.